In 2018, me and a couple of my colleagues were running a blog called Finshots. It was aimed at helping new investors understand businesses and stocks better. The same stuff we're doing in this channel right now. And one of the most peculiar stocks we stumbled upon at the time was this company called Indian Energy Exchange, or IEX. It was a monopoly stock with over 90% market share. It had no competition. And its financials looked almost unbelievable, like something you made on an Excel file. For the financial year ending March 2018, the company had made some 230 crores with an operating profit of nearly 185 crores. That's an operating profit margin of 80%. And I couldn't think of another company that did anything nearly similar. So if the business looked this good, why did I ultimately decide to stay away from this stock? Well, that's what I will try to cover in this video. And like always, please do consider liking and leaving a small comment in the video. It will help us reach more viewers. Alright, with that, we can get started. But before I explain exactly what Indian Energy Exchange does, I need to tell you a little bit about electricity, since this is going to be a video about energy and electricity only for the most part. Okay, so most of our electricity needs are met by burning coal, meaning you'll have a company like NTPC that will burn coal and produce electricity. These are called power generators. But if the power generator, or in this case an NTPC plant, is located all the way in Jharkhand and I'm here shooting a video right now, then who is responsible for moving the electricity from Jharkhand to this office? Well, if you guessed NTPC, then you're wrong, because it's not them. What actually ends up happening is this. Once power is generated, it makes its way into something called a transmission grid. You've probably seen structures like these. They are responsible for moving electricity from the power plant to substations across India. Karnataka, for instance, has over 1,000 substations littered across the state. And once the electricity makes its way to one of these substations, then a distribution company or a DISCOM can bring the electricity to your office, or to my office in this case. So to summarize, along the chain, there are three important participants. You have the generators, you have the transmission grid, and then you have the distributors. Now, you can ignore the transmission grid for now, because our story will primarily focus on these guys, generators and distributors, or DISCOMs. And we will start with the distribution companies first. Now, as a DISCOM, the primary obligation of every distribution company is to make sure that all consumers in their area have round-the-clock electricity supply. If this doesn't happen, then people are going to be unhappy with the distribution company. And the problem becomes even more pressing when you realize that distribution companies are state-owned. They're owned by the government. And if the government cannot ensure steady supply of electricity, you can imagine that the citizens won't be too pleased. So distribution companies have to make sure that they have the right quantum of electricity at all times. And to do that, they need to buy electricity from generators, from power plants. Historically, they've been doing it through something called as power purchase agreements. Usually, these are lengthy contracts lasting nearly 25 years. And once you sign these contracts, there's not a lot of scope for change. The price and quantity is largely fixed, and both generators and distributors, DISCOMs, have to honor their obligations. So these contracts don't offer a lot of breathing room. And this breathing room is very important, because imagine how electricity is consumed across the country. Demand doesn't remain constant throughout the year, no? In fact, it keeps changing every day. Throughout the day, in fact. Usually, you will have a few appliances that will keep running 24 hours, and this is usually described as the base load. But you'll also have occasions when pretty much everything is running in the office or your home. And so, a distribution company has to account for these changes in demand and still make sure that nobody suffers through a power cut. So they usually sign as many power purchasing agreements as they can to ensure that they will have enough power at all times. But imagine this, if they do this assuming peak demand at all times, then you can see that they're paying for electricity even when they're not drawing energy from the grid, that is during times of low demand. So they end up paying a lot more money than they should have. But if they change their strategy and only enter into PPAs to cover base load. Then during peak demand, they're busted. They have to start load shedding, power cuts to manage demand. That is a no-no as well. And there is another problem. Imagine energy prices go down because there is a lot of supply of coal and new energy initiatives. Then the distribution companies are stuck in a long-term PPA paying high energy prices. And since there isn't a lot of room for negotiation, they will have to simply suffer the consequences. They will have to keep paying the higher price even though they can source energy at a much cheaper rate right now. So you can see that this system is highly inefficient. What distribution companies really need is a system where they can buy electricity anytime, any place, whenever they need it and whenever they get a better price. What they really need is an exchange where they can simply buy and sell electricity the same way you buy and sell stocks. Quick and reliable. And the government recognized this long back. In 2005, they framed policies so as to allow companies to build platforms that let select participants buy and sell electricity for short-term needs. This was called open access, as in the open market. And in 2008, IEX, or the Indian Energy Exchange, became the first company to set up operation. And guess what? They became an instant monopoly. How? Well, let me give you an example. Imagine somebody builds a market and they invite a few sellers to set up their stall in this market. Now, once the market becomes operational, most buyers in the area will end up going to this place. And once buyers start lining up, even more sellers join because there is a ready audience. This is a virtuous cycle where you keep seeing more buyers and more sellers join in. And when this happens, both buyers and sellers refuse to go anywhere else because they can get the best price right here. Everybody is here. And this is kind of what happened with IEX also. Even though IEX had another competitor in PXIL, that is Power Exchange India Limited, who also started operations in 2008 by the way, IEX came to dominate the market since it usually extends the best prices by virtue of having the biggest set of buyers and sellers on its platform exclusively. So even if some other company tries to build marginally better platforms and lowers the brokerage or the transaction charge in this case, buyers and sellers will still prefer IEX because they're trading electricity products worth lakhs of rupees. And if they get a slightly better rate on a unit of electricity at IEX, they end up saving lakhs, even crores sometimes. This explains why no other company has been able to take away market share from IEX. And by virtue of being a monopoly, IEX has significant pricing power. Right now, if you are buying and selling electricity on IEX, you have to pay an admission fee of 25 lakhs, security deposit of 25 lakhs, annual subscription fee of 1 lakhs, and a transaction charge of 20 rupees per megawatt hour of electricity traded. Granted that the government caps the transaction charge, but you can still see how IEX is a money spinner. And they also completely own their technology and the platform. They don't need to spend on marketing and promotion. They mostly compensate their employees using ESOPs. And once they pay off these expenses, you will see that they are left with an operating profit margin of greater than 80%, even in recent years. It's the stuff of dreams. So you have to ask, why aren't more investors paying attention to this stock? And why isn't this on everyone's radar? Well, before we get to that, a quick word from today's sponsor, the company that I co-founded, Ditto Insurance. Now, I know that investing in good companies helps you build wealth, but what use is that wealth if you can't protect it? If something happened to me today, my family would have to liquidate most of my assets to aid them in their finances. But if I had a term insurance policy, then they would have enough money to tide over their entire life, even in my absence. For just over 10,000 rupees, you can get a term policy with a cover of 1 crore. And in my opinion, this should be the first step in your financial journey, even before you start buying stocks. So if you're looking to buy a term policy, make sure you check out Ditto Insurance. We have IRDAI certified experts who've already advised over 200,000 customers. So if you want to discuss your insurance needs, just head over to the link in the description box and we will take care of the rest. Okay, now that we are done with the plug, let's see why IEX hasn't become a mainstream stock despite its extraordinary profile. For starters, growth is hard to come by. I told you IEX is already a monopoly and so they are the entire market. If the market grows, they grow. But they can't take share from other players, which is how most companies end up growing. there's also another problem. Remember how I said discoms have been shifting from long-term power purchasing agreements to buying electricity on the spot? Well, this is a trend that develops on its own as companies begin to realize that they can save money doing just this. But on occasions when they feel like buying on the spot market is harder because the prices are higher or because there's an issue with supply, they will go back to long-term agreements. In fact, if you see the total share of electricity traded on the exchange or the spot market versus the total consumption of electricity, you can see how growth in IEX's revenues go hand in hand with this graph. As the share of exchange traded electricity goes up, revenue also goes up. But when there is a dip, that is when more people enter into long-term contracts as opposed to buying from the spot, suddenly you see a dip in IEX's revenue. And there isn't a lot a company can do about this. It's not always in their hands. But the truth is, this isn't why I decided to stay away from the stock back in 2018 when I was looking at the company. I decided to stay away from IEX because of regulations. This is a heavily regulated industry, and I quickly realized that if the government were to introduce adverse regulations, they could suddenly take away a large chunk of the company's revenue. For instance, they could alter the cap on the transaction charge. They could say, hey, we are going from 20 rupees per megawatt hour to 15 rupees. And suddenly, this affects nearly 80% of the company's revenue. Or they could introduce new platforms that could compete directly with IEX. For instance, the government introduced its own platform called DEEP to facilitate better price discovery for certain electricity contracts. And while the platform hasn't had a massive impact on IEX, investors were still worried about the company's prospects at the time. And then there is the elephant in the room. In the past week, IEX shares have been tanking and people are selling the stock like there is no tomorrow. And you could attribute pretty much all of this to something that the government did once again. So recently, they said they plan to introduce something called the Market Coupling Authority. And this is an existential threat to IEX because remember how I said IEX is a virtual monopoly because all the buyers and the sellers have settled on this platform as their primary place of doing business. Well, that's true for now. But if there is such a thing as Market Coupling Authority, then that means somebody on a competitor's exchange, say somebody on Power Exchange India Limited, will also be able to buy electricity from a seller on IEX because the orders are matched by the government appointed authority, that is the Market Coupling Authority. Okay, if you didn't understand me, in simple words, it doesn't matter where the buyers and the sellers are from here on in. You get the same price irrespective of which exchange you use. This is why people are worried. They think that the monopoly status of IEX will cease to exist because their biggest value proposition, that is the best price, will likely go away in the next 2-3 years since a market coupling authority will ensure uniform price across the exchange or in this case exchanges. Now, how will this really impact IEX? Well, we'll just have to wait and see. But if you're an investor in the company, please do bear in mind that this doesn't automatically make IEX a bad business. Look, even if the Market Coupling Authority suddenly popped up tomorrow, IEX could still dominate the market by virtue of having a better platform. So even if you see the same prices on PXIL and IEX could still have an advantage because execution is better on the platform. And IEX isn't just doing electricity contracts. They've also introduced a gas exchange to buy and sell gas and a carbon exchange to buy and sell carbon credits. So they do have other ways of making money. And there's one other thing. Government regulations don't always bleed businesses. Sometimes it could help them as well. For instance, the government has been planning to divert all electricity contracts, both long-term and short-term, to exchanges like IEX. And if that happens, then the sheer volume of business alone could help IEX regain its glory. My point is, just because I don't like a stock that operates in a highly regulated area doesn't mean you should too. Maybe you will find a money-making opportunity here and maybe you aren't as risk-averse as I am. So hopefully this video helped you in understanding both sides of the coin. Why IEX is in trouble and why IEX could still make a comeback. And like always, if you like the video, please leave a comment and subscribe to this channel. Also, tell me what you want me to cover next. I'll try and cover it in the next few weeks, but until then, bye-bye.